A US appeals court has ruled that most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal. The judges said while the president had considerable powers to respond to national emergencies, these didn't explicitly include the power to impose tariffs or taxes.
A U.S. appeals court has just delivered a stunning rebuke to former President Donald Trump's foreign policy agenda. In a landmark 7-4 ruling, judges declared that most of Trump's sweeping global tariffs were illegal. From China to Mexico to Canada, and nearly every other country in between, Trump's aggressive tariff program has now been called unconstitutional and contrary to law. For a man who built his political brand on the promise of putting America first and rewriting the rules of global trade, this decision strikes at the heart of his legacy. But the legal battle is far from over. The ruling won't take effect until October 14th, giving Trump time to appeal to the Supreme Court. And if the highest court takes up the case, the outcome could reshape not just trade policy, but the very limits of presidential power in America. So, what exactly happened? Why does it matter? And what comes next in this high-stakes legal showdown? Let's dive deep. Chapter 1: Trump's Tariff Revolution. From the moment he took office in 2017, Donald Trump promised to shake up the global trading system. He argued that America had been cheated for decades by China's manufacturing juggernaut, by Mexico's exports, by Europe's protectionist policies. His solution? Tariffs. Unlike his predecessors, who often preferred quiet negotiations or multilateral trade agreements, Trump wielded tariffs like a sledgehammer. He imposed sweeping levies not only on rivals like China, but also on close allies such as Canada, Mexico, and even European Union nations. One of his boldest moves was introducing reciprocal tariffs, a baseline 10% duty on nearly every country in the world. The idea was simple. If another nation imposed higher tariffs on American goods, the U.S. would hit back with equivalent tariffs of its own. Trump declared the policy a liberation day for America, insisting it would finally end decades of unfair trade. But boldness often breeds controversy. Almost immediately, small businesses, U.S. states, and global trading partners pushed back. Critics argued the tariffs raised consumer prices, sparked trade wars, and overstepped presidential authority. And now, the courts have agreed. Chapter 2: The Court's Ruling. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit issued its decision in a 127-page opinion. By a 7-4 majority, the judges ruled that Trump's tariffs were invalid as contrary to law. Their reasoning centered on the law Trump had used to justify his actions. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Passed in 1977, the IEEPA was designed to give presidents emergency authority to respond to unusual or extraordinary foreign threats. But the court made it clear that authority does not include tariffs. The judges wrote that the IEEPA neither mentions tariffs nor contains safeguards that allow the president unlimited authority to impose them. Instead, they argued, setting tariffs is a core congressional power, one that cannot be usurped by the executive branch unless Congress explicitly says so. In other words, Congress writes the rules on taxes and tariffs, not the president. The court emphasized that whenever Congress wants to delegate tariff authority to the White House, it does so clearly, using explicit terms like tariffs and duties. No such language exists in the IEEPA. Therefore, Trump's sweeping global tariffs were illegal from the start. Chapter 3: Trump's Reaction. True to form, Trump responded with outrage. Taking to his platform Truth Social, he called the decision partisan and dangerous. If allowed to stand, he wrote, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said that our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. It would make us financially weak, and we have to be strong. To Trump, tariffs were more than just trade policy. They were a symbol of sovereignty, a weapon to assert American power on the global stage. And now, a group of judges was threatening to strip that weapon from his hands. Chapter 4. The legal foundation crumbles. Trump's justification for the tariffs rested on his declaration of a national emergency in trade. He argued that America's trade imbalance, particularly with China, posed an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security. But the court rejected that reasoning. They ruled that while the president does have emergency powers under the IEEPA, those powers do not extend to imposing taxes or tariffs. Instead, tariffs fall under Congress's constitutional authority to regulate commerce. The judges noted that it was unlikely Congress ever intended to give presidents such sweeping powers when it passed the IEEPA in 1977. If anything, lawmakers have historically guarded tariff setting as their exclusive domain. This means Trump's entire emergency tariffs program was built on shaky legal ground. Chapter 5. Who challenged the tariffs? The lawsuits that led to this ruling were filed by small businesses and a coalition of U.S. states. These groups argued that Trump's tariffs were crippling their industries, raising costs, and undermining local economies. For example, importers who relied on goods from China or Mexico suddenly faced 10% price hikes overnight. Small manufacturers who depended on raw materials from abroad saw their margins vanish. And farmers, often targeted by retaliatory tariffs from other nations, felt squeezed from both ends. By striking down the tariffs, the court sided with these groups, signaling that even powerful presidents cannot rewrite the economic rulebook without Congress's approval. Chapter 6. The broader impact. The ruling has sweeping implications. If upheld, it would eliminate Trump's reciprocal tariffs, his baseline global tariffs, and even additional levies on Canada, Mexico, and China. That said, not all tariffs are affected. Duties Trump imposed on steel and aluminum, which were justified under a different law, the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, remain intact. But the heart of Trump's tariff agenda is now in jeopardy. For American consumers, the ruling could mean lower prices if tariffs are rolled back. For businesses, it could mean more predictable supply chains. But for Trump and his allies, it represents a dramatic weakening of their America First economic strategy. Chapter 7. The Supreme Court Showdown. The appeals court ruling does not take effect until October 14th, giving Trump's legal team time to appeal. And they almost certainly will. If the Supreme Court takes the case, it will be one of the most consequential trade law disputes in decades. At issue is not just whether Trump's tariffs were legal, but whether presidents have the authorities to unilaterally impose sweeping economic measures without Congress. The stakes are high. The Supreme Court has grown increasingly skeptical of presidents using broad powers without explicit legislative backing. Under what's known as the Major Questions Doctrine, the court has recently struck down efforts by both Democratic and Republican presidents to push sweeping policies without clear congressional authorization. That doctrine could spell trouble for Trump. But with 6 conservative justices on the court, 3 of them appointed by Trump himself, his supporters believe he still has a fighting chance. Chapter 8. The Biden Factor. While this case centers on Trump, its implications extend to President Joe Biden as well. Any ruling that limits presidential authority on tariffs would bind future presidents too. Biden has largely kept many of Trump's tariffs in place, particularly on China, as part of his own strategy to counter Beijing's rise. If the courts ultimately strip away the president's power to impose such tariffs, Biden and every president after him would need to rely more heavily on Congress. That could make U.S. trade policy slower, more complicated, and more vulnerable to partisan gridlock. Chapter 9. The Global Reaction. Around the world, Trump's tariffs have been a flashpoint of anger. China retaliated with tariffs of its own, sparking a trade war that rattled global markets. Canada and Mexico, long considered friendly neighbors, bristled at being lumped in with adversaries. Even European allies complained that Trump's approach undermined the global trading system. The court's decision could now reopen trade talks on a different footing. Nations that grudgingly accepted Trump's tariffs may seek to renegotiate deals. And countries that struck reduced tariff agreements with Washington may wonder whether those deals are still valid. In short, this ruling doesn't just reshape American law, it reverberates across the global economy. Chapter 10. What comes next? So, where does this leave Trump, his tariffs, and America's trade future? First, the legal battle isn't over. Expect an appeal to the Supreme Court. If the court rules against Trump, it would mark one of the biggest limits on presidential power in decades. If the court sides with him, it could unleash a new era of presidential authority over trade. Second, the political implications are massive. For Trump, who is again campaigning on his record of toughness, the ruling undercuts one of his signature achievements. For Biden, it offers both a headache and an opportunity. He must navigate the fallout while also positioning himself as a defender of the rule of law. Finally, for ordinary Americans, the stakes are personal. Tariffs shape the prices we pay for goods, the strength of our industries, and the health of our economy. Whether they remain or are rolled back could affect everything from grocery bills to global stability. The U.S. Court of Appeals has fired a warning shot across the bow of presidential power, ruling that Trump's global tariffs were illegal. Now the case is heading toward a likely Supreme Court showdown that could define the future of American trade policy. Will Trump's tariffs be remembered as bold acts of leadership or as unconstitutional overreach struck down by the courts? What do you think? Should presidents have sweeping authority to impose tariffs in the name of national security? Or should Congress remain the gatekeeper of economic power? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth documentaries on global politics, law, and the battles that shape our world.